Super Mario Bros. 3 from Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
The year is 1990, and with a new decade comes new innovations. The Simpsons began gracing television sets, NASA launches the Hubble Space Telescope, and computers see the birth of the World Wide Web. Among these milestones of the past was one that would have a significant impact on history, at least for gaming: Super Mario Bros. 3. Coming from the arcades nearly a decade prior and giving the video game home console market a shot in the arm, Mario helped Nintendo create a lasting franchise, one ripe with innovation and fun. Except for you, we'll get to you later. With the US releases of Super Mario Bros. 1 and 2 being a huge success, can Nintendo really strike gold 3 times? To find out, we're going to take a deep dive into Mario's third home console outing in the West and see what it brings to the table. From leaps in gameplay and visuals to its later re-releases, we'll see just what's so special about Super Mario Bros. 3. Before we can do that, however, we'll need to jump back in time to know just how the world's favorite plumber ended up here in the first place. In the early 80s, arcades were the place to play the hottest new games, and where video game developers tried their hand at new features and technology to keep the quarters coming. Nintendo, being a toy company, was all up on that. But their latest release, Radar Scope, spelled out trouble for the company. The US market didn't want to play another space-themed shooter. I wonder why. So 2/3 of the 3,000 Radar Scope units went unsold, and then president of Nintendo of Japan, Hiroshi Yamauchi, tasked head engineer of Nintendo, Gunpei Yokoi, to manage a conversion of these unused cabinets to a new game. As a risky move for Yamauchi, Nintendo employee and artist of the game's Sheriff, Shigeru Miyamoto, was given his debut role as lead game designer because no one else was available, according to Miyamoto. This, in my opinion, has to be one of the most pivotal moments in all of gaming. The arcade game Donkey Kong was born out of this conversion project. Released in summer of 1981, the single-screen platformer was a huge success. This marked Mario's first appearance in a game, then known as the Carpenter Jumpman. I mean, why not Hot Boy or Leap Guy? This always seemed like a phoned-in name to me. Like, no wonder they changed it, like, spoilers, a year later. The goal was simple yet addictive. Get to the top of the construction site and save Jumpman's girlfriend, Pauline, from the clutches of the evil Donkey Kong. Platform up angled girders, over gaps and barrels, dodge flames, climb ladders, and power up with a hammer to make it to the end of each stage. This game set the scene for what Mario would become and cemented Miyamoto as a goated game designer. A year later, in 1982, Nintendo set out to capitalize on the massive success of Donkey Kong with an arcade sequel. As you would imagine, Donkey Kong is at it again, and Mario has to stop— Wait, Mario, what did you do? The story continues where the original left off, with Donkey Kong captured. It's up to DK's little baby boy to save his father this time around. The titular Donkey Kong Jr. must swing from vines in this single-screen platformer and defeat the dastardly Mario, who now has a real name and stars as the villain for the first and only time in a video game. 1983 marks the release of a much different game, bringing the now well-known Mario back as protagonist. Mario Bros. In the arcade. Mario needs to clear the sewers of enemies and rack up a high score. This game sees the introduction of so many Mario staples. Mario now has a brother named Luigi to help him. Luigi is basically just a palette swap of the same sprite here, most likely with the dual purpose of keeping the gameplay identical for multiplayer and to save on memory. This technique would be seen on and off through the Super Nintendo era of Mario games. Quick side note, do you know why it's called Mario Bros. When it's Mario and Luigi? Because their last name is Mario. His name is Mario. This was legitimately confirmed by Nintendo. Anyways, the Bros also see the start of their long and lucrative plumbing career in this title. And lucrative it is, seeing as coins also make their debut here as a way to increase score. This career change for Mario was probably to sell the idea of the pipe motif seen here and throughout the later Mario games. The POW block is introduced as a one-time use enemy flipping item, and the Koopa Troopa is here in some fashion as the Shell Creeper enemy. The boys start to take on a slightly stockier appearance and are slowly transforming into the characters we know today. So after Mario had been a huge success in the arcades with 3 titles spanning 3 years, Nintendo wanted to bring him into the home. But this year marked a low point in the game console industry. Market saturation, the economic decline of Atari, and distrust of retailers caused by numerous bad game releases led to a crash of the console industry. No company wanted to touch home consoles for the next 2 years, and many believed the industry was dead until Nintendo brilliantly found a way to sell their new home console. The Nintendo Entertainment System was sold to US consumers in 1985 under the guise of a toy bundled with Rob the Robot. Another huge factor in reigniting the video game industry was getting a Mario game onto TVs. As a launch title for the NES, Super Mario Bros. Turned the genre on its head by revolutionizing what was possible at home in 1985. The game was now a stage-clear platformer, where the goal was simple: get to the flagpole at the end. This was the first Mario game to feature smooth, horizontal scrolling thanks to the advanced NES hardware. This allowed levels to be much larger and more complex than the single-screen black background purgatories of Mario's past. A total of 32 levels to be exact, spread over 8 worlds. 8 worlds would be seen time and time again going forward for Mario. Power-ups that are in practically every Mario game started life here. The invincibility granting Starman, the Super Mushroom allowing 1 extra hit, and the Fire Flower, a ranged attack for Mario, all made their debut here. Mario now has lives, which can be increased with the new item, the 1-Up Mushroom. There's also new abilities like breaking bricks when Mario is in his big beefy form, hitting the new question blocks which grant power-ups or coins, and running while holding B. Mario can even stomp enemies' heads to kill them. And there are plenty of new enemies introduced here, all of which have gone on to become franchise staples. Shell Creepers return from the arcade, now known as Koopas, sporting their more contemporary appearance. Shell Creepers crawled so Koopas could walk, or however the saying goes. As well as Koopas are the introduction of Goombas, Buzzy Beetles, Spinies, Bullet Bills, Hammer Bros, Lakitus, Piranha Plants, Cheep Cheeps, Bloopers, and Potoboos in the first Super Mario game. New characters Princess Toadstool and the Mushroom People, or now known as Princess Peach and the Toads respectively, debuted in this title, as well as the final boss King Koopa, or better known as Bowser. Luigi makes a player to return as palette-swapped Mario once again, although this time players take turns beating stages. No simultaneous multiplayer here. Super Mario Bros. Was a massive success and one of the most influential games of all time, allowing Nintendo to continue on in the home console market. Due to the overwhelming success of the NES and Super Mario Bros., Nintendo got to work right away on a sequel in Japan for the NES add-on, the Famicom Disk System. The sequel, known as Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan, aimed to bring a more difficult approach to the formula, and not much else. The gameplay and visuals were almost 100% identical, and the level design was often cheap and much more difficult than the original. Nintendo of America decided against localizing this game in the US, due to the game not feeling like a sequel graphically and being too difficult for the American audience at the time. The game would eventually come to America in remastered form as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels in the compilation Super Mario All-Stars, a Super Nintendo title we'll come back to later. Now Nintendo was left with a choice: have a large gap between Mario releases in the US, or find a way to quickly produce a sequel for the American audience to keep Mario relevant. The decision was made to rework a title made only for Japan by the same development team that made Super Mario Bros. Doki Doki Panic as a Mario title for release in the US in 1987. Miyamoto had much input in this game, insisting the team originally make it more Mario-like during development prior to the decision to make it into a Mario game. With 4 playable characters, Nintendo decided to rework them as Mario, the balance character, Luigi, the high-jumping tall character, Peach's first playable role as the floaty character, and Toad's first playable role as the fast and strong character. These characteristics would continue to apply to these characters in modern Mario titles, such as Super Mario 3D World. Even though this was never intended to be a Mario game, Nintendo would canonize many enemies of Super Mario Bros. 2 in future entries. Shy Guys, Sniffets, Ninjas, Pokies, Bob-ombs, and Birdo all make their debut with this game. Players can now pick up and throw items for the first time. Boss battles are also prominent throughout the game, unlike Super Mario Bros., including very little boss fights. Super Mario Bros. 2 went on to be hugely successful in the US, with consumers being none the wiser of the conversion process from Japan to America. Japan would later see a release of this version known as Super Mario USA in 1992. Now that you're up to speed on the innovations and gameplay features that made Mario such a huge success, it's time to see what Nintendo could really do. Development for Super Mario Bros. 3 started directly after work finished on the Lost Levels. Shigeru Miyamoto returned to directing this entry after working on The Legend of Zelda, and Takashi Tezuka assisted in directing Super Mario Bros. 3. One of the original concepts Tezuka pitched for Super Mario 3 was to have the camera looking down from a diagonal view. This meant the game would look more similar to The Legend of Zelda. Miyamoto said about this idea, "In Super Mario Bros., it is important whether Mario's feet hit the ground or not, even barely. With a diagonal view from slightly overhead, you lost your sense of distance to the ground." So the decision was made early in development to retain the signature side view Mario is known for. The checkered floor in the intro is a relic of the once overhead view. Regarding the visuals of the game, when looking back on the lost levels, it was clear that the game was reusing tons of assets, from the engine to the sprites of the original Mario. I think it forgot to use the fun. Tezuka took this criticism to heart and wanted to change everything about the game, not just the gameplay, but the visual design of the game. Sprites take on a much more detailed and cartoony appearance, appearing larger in general than the original game. Interestingly, Luigi would revert back to his palette swap roots, being the same sprite as Mario with a green coat of paint. Levels also have much more visual appeal, with broad ranges of designs from blocks to deserts and airships to water. Due to the nature of map design and the fully remade art, artists painstakingly drew the maps, layouts, and sprites on graph paper by hand. A system known as the Character Generator Computer-Aided Design, or CG-CAD, was used to translate these diagrams and drawings into sprites that the NES could place around its levels, once the programmers told it how to do so. The many R&D teams at Nintendo compete to come up with the most revolutionary ideas, in hopes that these ideas are greenlit by staff such as Miyamoto to be added to games. A turned-down idea for Mario 3 was the idea of Mario turning into a creature, specifically a centaur. Eventually, this idea was molded into Mario having a tail. The team stuck with their first idea, a raccoon suit. Miyamoto said in an interview, "I'm sorry to say there isn't a funny story behind why we chose the raccoon tail. We thought the raccoon tail worked best from a practical point of view, and it fit right in with Mario's style. It also created some great new gameplay possibilities." Did he need to be a raccoon to do that? Many returning enemies were given new variants to keep the gameplay fresh, with new iterations of Hammer Bros, Koopas, Goombas, and Piranha Plants. One new enemy created for Mario 3, and one of Miyamoto's favorites, the Chain Chomper, was inspired by a bad experience he had with a dog when he was young. Super Mario 3 was developed with the idea that a wide range of players with differing skill levels could play and enjoy the game. This means the early worlds are more forgiving, with extra coins and 1-ups placed to ease the player into the game. By the end of the game, difficulty ramps up significantly, providing a challenge for players who made it that far. Mario 3 is the Goldilocks of video games. With the much too difficult lost levels and the much easier Super Mario Bros. 2, Nintendo struck the balance perfectly for Mario 3. The difficulty is what you make of it. If you just want to have a good time, use an infinite 1-up trick and just play through the game casually. If you want a challenge, you can strive to find the secrets and beat every single level. Designing games with dynamic difficulty defined by the player's path through the game would be Nintendo's philosophy from here on out. Miyamoto knew that if an idea would make the game better, it had to be implemented. This craftsmanship of the game led to its 6-month delay from spring to fall 1988 in Japan, and the game was better off for it. For the Western audience, this release date was too close to the very recent release of Super Mario 2. The decision was made to postpone localization until 1990 due to Mario 2 selling so well and a concern for chip shortages at the time. Prior to launch in the US, a movie deal was struck with Universal to heavily feature the game in the plot of The Wizard. At this point in the late 80s, the game was gaining unparalleled hype. Super Mario Bros. 3 felt like a direct sequel to Super Mario 1, being a return to the power-up, side-scrolling, course-clearing, turtle-murdering gameplay of the original. But Mario 3 isn't just a rehash of what came before. It ups the ante in every way. Using the MMC3 chip built into the cartridge, Mario 3 added the capability for much more expressive sprites, diagonal scrolling, and new gameplay features. Except that's impossible! With the extra grunt the Mario 3 cartridge provided, the team decided to go with the stage play design, where elements of each level look like flat cutouts and the aesthetic almost looks like set dressing in some levels. Arguably the biggest addition to Mario 3 is the all-new world map. There's still 8 worlds full of levels, excluding the warp zone, but this time around they're all accessible from an overworld. So while the minute-to-minute gameplay is structured similarly, the world map acts like a sort of glue that holds it together. This means some levels are optional, there's branching paths, overworld obstacles move around, and now there's minigames to play for rewards, resulting in a much less linear experience. It feels more like an adventure now, where you aren't just hopping from course to course. You can choose your own path, literally, and each playthrough can be meaningfully different. Mario controls better than ever. He has momentum now, where the longer you run, the more P you build up. Anyways, when that happens, Mario spreads his arms and prepares for takeoff. If you have the Tanuki suit or Super Leaf, Mario can now fly for a short period of time. Mario 3 is some of the best Mario stages of all time. They feel punchy and challenging, always giving that one more try feeling. With so much variety, not only aesthetically, but in layouts, challenges, enemies, it never feels old or repetitive. The game gets legitimately hard by the end too. Mario 3 is so well known for secrets hidden in every nook and cranny that Nintendo Power's 13th issue was just the official guide for the game, delivered to the doorsteps the same month that the game was released. The most well-known and powerful secrets in Mario 3 were the warp whistles. As an interesting aside, the tune that plays when Mario uses the warp whistle is the same tune that plays when Link uses the whistle in the original Legend of Zelda. It makes sense that the tune for these similar items would be referenced, since Miyamoto directed Mario 3 directly after he helped conceptualize the ever-popular Legend of Zelda. Never heard of it. The warp whistles are mega powerful items that let you skip entire worlds. Maybe you're sick of replaying the early levels, or you want to get to the end as quickly as possible. The warp whistles allow you to jump over huge sections of the game, which is essential for replay so you aren't always playing 1-1 every time you turn your NES on. Another great secret and reward for being thorough is the white mushroom houses. These toad houses won't appear unless you collect a minimum of coins in specific stages in each world, excluding World 8. They contain either a P-wing in odd-numbered worlds or anchor in even-numbered worlds. A wandering hammer brother can be converted to a treasure ship with ease. You must be in World 1, World 3, World 5, or World 6. A wandering hammer brother must be on the world with a coin total ending in a multiple of 11, but not 0, unless the 15 point on the credit score to then it must be 100. Every level in Mario is so chock full of secrets that the game is infinitely replayable, because with every playthrough you can learn a quicker way to beat a level, or find a hidden block with a power-up, or fly up to totally optional portions of the stage. You can warp past the early game and practice the later levels. It really is a masterclass in game design. At the time, Mario 3 was praised for just about every aspect of the game. I mean, this was a big game. It's not just the size of the cartridge that matters. There was so much to do, so many levels to explore over and over, so many power-ups to play your way, and the map made the game feel like a true adventure in an actual world. We'll look into how the graphics have evolved in subsequent re-releases, but at the time of release, this was top-notch NES eye candy, with a catchy soundtrack that's still in people's minds today. Mario 3 proved to have staying power as it lands on just about every best video games of all time lists. This is a PlayStation exclusives list. This game must be really good. Mario was a huge hit throughout the entire 80s, so it only made sense for Nintendo to capitalize on the sales and popularity of the Mario games on NES by remaking them and bundling them in a seriously good deal for Super Nintendo. The game's graphics, presentation, and music were all upgraded, adding a fresh coat of paint to an otherwise great slew of NES Mario titles. Super Mario All-Stars is a very early example of a remake, and Nintendo led the charge in how to do a remake right. This was 4, sometimes 5 Mario games, including the first ever US release of a bad, I mean Japanese-only mainline Mario game. We'll be focusing on the Mario 3 portion of All-Stars, of course, which probably sees the least amount of gameplay changes. The first and most impressive change you'll notice is the visuals. The NES graphics still look great and have a simplistic cartoon-like charm to them, but All-Stars adds a little bit of pazzow! I don't know. While the general resolution of the game is the same, all the sprites see a facelift, going from a limited selection of solid colors to many more shades, adding depth to the objects and characters in the world. Looking at Mario's sprite, you can see this around his features, rounding him out. The bushes here do have a strip of darker shade in the original, but jumping over to the SNES bushes shows how many more shades are possible to really show how the light is playing off their rounded shape. In most cases, the pixel structure of the black outline is the same, but the SNES color variety gives sprites much more definition. In this version of the game, Luigi is sporting his taller, slimmer look that he wore in Super Mario 2. Some effects were changed entirely. I like how the lava in the castle has a lot more detail in the remake and bubbles over the plane of lava, appearing to be much more unstable, while the NES version, while looking suitably detailed, sort of cuts off in a perfectly flat horizontal line. It just appears less threatening. One of my favorite new features of Mario All-Stars is the addition of parallax backgrounds. This can be seen really nicely if we bring back the castle level. The original is a solid black void, making it feel a bit flat. But when looking at the SNES, there's usually 2 additional background layers within the stages I've checked out. The first layer shifts slower than the scrolling of the stage, and the second layer, appearing darker, just slightly moves as you progress. This combination of scrolling at different rates and darkening the furthest layer really gives off a believability like this is a large room. This same effect can be seen in the cave levels. I'm not a huge fan of their look in the NES, as I'm not sure what they were going for. It appears more like a sci-fi level because of the bright blue metallic color choice, and the pebbles even appear to be stars in the background. In All-Stars, this level looks strikingly different, with earthy tones and spires of rock in the distance. They really sell the effect of this being a cave by layering in some reverb to all of the sounds. All of this being said, there's a couple minor nitpicks I have with the parallax backgrounds. Take these clouds for instance, they are in front of the hills and move faster when the stage scrolls, but I really think they should be behind the hills moving slower, as clouds are much further away than hills. Also, Mario 3 is a play, so in the original, the objects cast a shadow directly behind them on the background, meaning it's just a flat sky-colored background like a set would have. But in All-Stars, this gives way for more traditional Mario settings, and this hurts the play aesthetic a bit. A few UI and gameplay changes were made as well, which I think is a nice touch. Instead of the limited NES palette and therefore needing the HUD on the bottom to borrow from the sky, the HUD is now bursting with color for each indicator. The map screen sees a surprising downgrade in just one aspect, as cleared areas are no longer color-coded, all taking on the same white background. We'll come back to this later. You can now save your progress in this version with 3 save slots per game. The soundtrack has been changed to be played on the SNES sound chip, which gives the overall sound a warmer feel with distinct instruments being used to form the composition. With the NES, the classic chiptune sound is still such a banger, so this really comes down to personal preference. It's been noted that Mario All-Stars features some physics changes in the way Mario feels, but I honestly couldn't feel any difference. I did notice that you can now grab your item in Toad houses while he's talking, so that's a thing. Overall, I think this version holds up remarkably well, and I recommend it as the best way to play Mario 3 for newcomers. It could have been released as a standalone title and still been a great product, but instead it came as a revamped collection of 3 great Super Mario games and lost levels. So when it came time to re-release these versions of Mario on the GBA, they released them all as standalones. The GBA release of Mario 3 is a very interesting one. It takes the All-Stars version and crams it on a 3-inch portable screen. At the time, this was something else. A full-on Super Nintendo remake of the bona fide classic now running on a handheld device. What's the catch? I hope you don't like seeing what you're doing. You see, the Game Boy screen is lower resolution than the original SNES version, with only 67% of the total pixels. Nintendo opted to keep the pixel ratio 1:1, meaning that the game is essentially cut off, slightly on the horizontal axis and quite a bit vertically, but the pixels remain square and look the same as the original. It doesn't take long to get used to, but there's always a feeling things are a bit cramped. A change that is hit or miss for me is the addition of Mario's voice dialogue.
Here we go! Super Mario!
It's mostly miss. It's not really that bad, it's just pretty repetitive and tinny sounding. He has something to say every time he gets a power-up.
Just what I needed!
Graphically, from what I can tell, the game is almost identical to the All-Stars version. There are some changes in the HUD. Since the screen real estate is so cramped, the bottom menu is now just the P bar overlaid on the background, and the other info is displayed across the top Mario 1 style. Remember the map being worse in the All-Stars version? They actually went back and added the colors in again. I like this much better. The biggest reason you'd want to play this somewhat inferior version of Mario 3 today is because of the optional bonus levels. In 2002, Nintendo released the e-reader add-on for the GBA. You swipe the cards and you get the levels, as well as items and demonstration speedruns with tips and tricks. So it's basically DLC in 2002. The add-on ultimately failed in the West, but we'll save that topic for a different day. The coolest form of these cards were the level cards. These are almost all entirely new levels for Super Mario 3 that almost no one played back in the day. 38 total levels were created, with only 12 levels released in the US. The Mario 3 GBA cart actually includes additional storage for holding 32 simultaneous e-reader levels, so if you had a bunch of levels cards, 2 GBAs, an e-reader, and a link cable, you could save these to your copy of Mario 3. No one's ever done that. Nowadays, you just need the Nintendo Switch Online and expansion pack service, or have purchased a copy on the Wii U Virtual Console before its closure. Nintendo actually went in and modded the ROM themselves to function with all 38 levels instead of maxing out at 32, and opened up the Japanese exclusive levels worldwide. From the title screen, these levels are accessed in a 4th save slot. This will bring you to the e-reader world, which allows you to access all levels from a list as almost a completely different game. I really like how this works. It feels like its own expansion, and with the modern versions you can play through all of the levels. They're all designed to have a few coins be collected, which is how Mario Course Clear games work today. And these levels are weird. They feel like precursors to Mario Maker levels. Like this one you can beat right away, but have to do challenge rooms if you want to get the collectible coins. This level feels like Flappy Bird more so than just stealing Mario's assets. There will always be something special about Mario 3. It brought with it so many famous Mario staples like world maps, a multitude of power-ups, and a colorful cast of characters that we still see today. It's remembered as one of the top Nintendo games, no, top video games of all time. And with there being 3 distinct versions, they all have their charms and bring something new to the table. The original is a great way to see historically where Mario was in 1990, while the All-Stars version's visuals still hold up to this day without any of the NES jank. But if I were to recommend a version, it would probably be the modern releases of Super Mario Advance 4, just due to the amount of content the e-reader levels add, and the game still looks really nice. The only trade-off is a zoomed-in experience, but you get used to it. To be honest, you can't go wrong with any release of Super Mario Bros. 3. It's just a shame that I prefer Super Mario World. That'll be it for this video, guys. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button and hit that bell to be notified when I upload more videos. And if you like this video, give it a like.